So I'm going to have to apologize, and this video is really, the whole video actually is going to wrap around the apology, which I will get to at the end. But I got some bad news about this channel. I wanted to get started with my philosophy, why I live this way, how I've developed everything I've developed, and why I've developed it. So I've listed a lot of things there. I hope to get them all covered. As you know, I just recently bought a new generator here. It's a cheap little thing. Never heard of it, Power Smart. It's got its plus and minuses. It's not very powerful. It's only 1,500 watts peak. I think it's 1,000 watts running watts. I can't hardly get anything to run with it, like the refrigerator, the old refrigerator we had. Sorry about the wind. It's pretty breezy today. But this thing's really nice when it comes to running the battery charger. The battery charger is something you can buy at Walmart. It's a 2 amp, 10 amp, 25 amp battery charger. I got it off of Amazon, actually. They're about $80, I think. I have a backup, just in case this one ever burns up. Battery charger, that is. And this one runs it just fine, and that's why I bought this one. That old one that we had, it's what, 5 years old now, and the carburetor was having some issues. I replaced the carburetor and it's running again, but I put it on retirement. We're going to use this one down here. It was a lot cheaper to replace that generator up there. It was going to be about $500. I think this one was $299. Although it doesn't do all the things I would like for it to do, it's well worth the price considering the amount of time this one has to run charging batteries on cloudy days and in the winter, and it runs a lot. So I didn't see why I wanted to invest a bunch of money into a nice expensive generator like that up there, or a little cheap one like this. If it lasts 3 or 4 years, great. And if I need more power, I can use those two generators up there. As you'll know or remember, I have a dual fuel. That one's 2,500 watts. It runs propane and gasoline. I primarily use that one for the well. Then I have that old one, it's 2,000 watts. And it runs like new now. Of course, it uses a lot of oil, but it runs like new. And then we got this one, so we got 3. And I'm pretty satisfied with having 3. I think that's a good number to have. I think that dual fuel is gonna last forever. I'm running on propane because the gas can go bad. And I run it so infrequently running the well that I worry the gas could go bad and disintegrate the gaskets and the rings in the carburetor. Propane is cleaner, doesn't rot out the gaskets, and it doesn't leave a lot of carbon residue inside the engine like gasoline does. So I really like running that one. I think that one should probably last maybe the rest of my life, considering the gasoline one lasted 5 years while it's still going, don't get me wrong. I mean, I ran that one, what did I say, 10,000 hours, 8,000 hours? It was a massive amount of hours. If this one lasts 3 or 4 years, that'd be great, cheap. Now, it is a little bit louder, I have to admit, so that is the second disadvantage. So if you're trying to run your homestead with this generator, it may not be the best purchase. But if you're just wanting to charge some batteries with it, or run a fan or a light, or I can't even imagine what else you would want to run. I don't use that many appliances anymore. And with it being loud, you can't even take it camping. You have to take one of those really quiet ones. I don't even know what the decibels are. Now, it does advertise that it tries to make it quiet. And the way it does that is just with the engine itself. It just doesn't produce a lot of noise. Whereas those up there, they got insulation wrapped all over it and trying to sound buffer it. So that raises the cost of those. This one, it's just louder. Something we have to understand with these generators is its variable speed. And that's what keeps the life of the generator, is it runs really low. So I'm just going to throw out some easy numbers here. So none of these numbers are actual, but it'll give you an idea of what these generators can do. That generator up there runs 2,000 watts. However, when you start it up and you turn it down on low, it's producing, let's say, 200 watts on low. It's running real slow, low RPMs, great engine life. So it's always producing 200 RPMs, or let's just say 10 amps. Just for the sake of argument, again, not trying to make it mathematical wizardry or anything. I'm sure somebody's gonna say, oh no, that math doesn't work. Just hear me out. That means it's always producing that 200 watts constantly. Until you shut it off, it's producing 200 watts. But when you ramp it up in speed and you turn it on full power, it's starting to run 2,000 watts. Well, if you don't need 2,000 watts, then you don't want it running that fast. You're just wasting gas. That's all you're doing, is just running and wasting gas. So when I run the battery charger, let's say at 10 amps, I can run it down on low, and I'm using all the power that it's producing on low. That's great. Not using any more gasoline. So on that generator up there, it can run 11 hours on a gallon of gas at 20% or 25% or whatever it is. I think it's 25%. So as long as I'm not going above that 20 or 25% power usage, I'll get 11 hours of gasoline. But as soon as I kick on a refrigerator or a freezer and I go above that 10 amps, then I don't get that kind of fuel economy. I get, say, 8 hours per gallon of gas. So you try as hard as possible to keep your generators running at that low RPM, so you don't want to use any more electricity than that 25% of electric, or 20%, whatever it is. So running the battery charger, for example, I'm not using any more than that 20 or 25% electric being produced by the generator. So it doesn't matter to me one bit, or to the generator, if there's any electrical loss, because that's a big concern to my viewers, is that when you're transferring electric from AC through a charger to DC, you lose some efficiency there. When the components are getting hot, that means that the electric is being thrown out. It's not being used. And the battery charger does get hot. That's why it's got a fan in there. It's getting hot. So you're losing electricity. But as long as I'm not going over the 25%, I don't care. It doesn't matter. The generator is producing that electric anyways. To me, this makes sense. Now, my solar panels, so on a sunny day, they produce 1,000 watts, and they do the bulk of the charging around here. They do all the work. Now, when it's cloudy or the days are short, I do have to run the generator. Now, people are going to tell me I'll get more batteries, and I understand all that, but that's not what this video is about. Not trying to get into the philosophies of... Now, when I set up my solar panels, I did it as a DIY project. I knew all the components that I needed to buy. I didn't have to design anything myself. I built this using components that you can buy off the shelf. Rich Solar, got them on Amazon, $80 a piece. Charge controller, I think was $100. You go to my channel, actually, go to my playlist, you can go over to solar panels, click solar panels, and I got a bunch of videos on how to set this up. It's just not hard. So you go to charge controller. Charge controller charges the batteries. The batteries produce electricity to the inverter, and the inverter sends electricity, AC electricity, to my house. So everything I needed, I could buy. I didn't have to build anything. Years ago, I tried to build solar panels. You can buy, or at least back then, you could buy the solar cells. So let's assume for a minute that I'm sure this is true. This is one cell right here, what I've got my hand going around. You can buy that. It's a piece of glass, that's all it is. I mean, very fragile. So I bought a bunch of solar cells. Well, they came in the mail, or UPS or FedEx or whatever it was, and I would bet 10 of them were already broke, just being delivered. So then I tried to start soldering them together, and that was a disaster. So I don't know how much they were. Let's say they were $200. And I wasted all that money trying to save money. It was a disaster. So this, although, you know, I had to save up money to buy all these components, really this is just a jigsaw puzzle. If you know how to put the jigsaw puzzle together, all the pieces are there. And I just find it easier doing it that way. But I'm repeatedly asked to change my channel to something that it's not. I will be happy to give you all the pros and cons of what it is I do. And I try to make my life as inexpensive as possible. So if there's a way to save money, I try to save money. But I'm always told that you should do this or do that to save money. One of the things people want me to do is they want me to build a wind generator. I have tried several different times to build a wind generator using a alternator, and then I actually used an old generator. Cars used to have generators. Before they had alternators, they had generators. The alternator I could never figure out. I know there are going to be people, oh, just watch this YouTube channel. I've watched them all. I simply do not have the brain capacity to understand what they're telling me. The alternator requires electricity to produce electricity. They call it a charge. And there's an extra wire involved. It's been a long time since I had to deal with this, so I don't remember all the components and all the specifics. But I do know enough that I couldn't figure out how to get electricity to it so I could produce electricity. I thought about ripping the whole electrical system out of the car and just using all the components. This was my ex-wife, and she said, you're spending too much money. This is not a savings if you're having to spend this much money to save. I used an old generator. The generator was pretty easy to understand. It just produced DC electric. And it worked. It actually worked. The problem is it never worked well enough to produce enough volts. It would produce the amps. So you need volts and amps to produce watts. It would produce 12 volts. But in order to charge a battery, a lead acid battery, you probably need more like 16 volts. Solar panels, they'll tell you this is a 12 volt system, but I think these solar panels were actually 18 volts. And so when the sun's beating down, it's making 18 volts, 5.5 amps. Charge controller actually converts some of those voltages into amps. The wind generator never produced enough volts. So at nighttime, even though it would be enough volts to turn on the charge controller, it would never actually charge the battery. The battery just didn't, it just wasn't pushing enough into the battery to overcome the battery. The battery has its own voltage. So let's say your battery was at 12.2 and you're trying to get 12 into it. It just couldn't get past the 12.2. So the only time the wind generator worked is when the sun was up, because it was a hybrid system. I had my solar panels and the wind generator. So the solar panels were producing enough volts. So when the wind generator would kick on, it would produce the amps. So it was a good hybrid system, but not anything I could run independently. So it was a failure. I actually watched someone who spent on YouTube, watched somebody who spent a fortune, I would say thousands of dollars, to make a water wheel. All kinds of lumber cost, and it ended up, it didn't work. So he hired a consultant to come out to explain to him what was wrong, and of course he was using an alternator, and there just was not enough speed. When they made a bigger gear, then there was not enough power. So the wooden turbine thing, the water couldn't push it anymore because I had this bigger wheel to get more speed. So the whole thing failed after thousands of dollars. You know, of course, you live off grid to save money. Well, if you're spending thousands of dollars basically to make firewood, you're not saving money. So I was asked, why don't I make a DC generator on my own? Get a gas lawnmower engine and an alternator. Put it all together. Make DC. Well, if I could get past the charge of an alternator, like I told you, I never could figure that out. But let's assume I could figure it out now that there's more YouTube channels out there, which I just recently, maybe a month ago, watched, and I still didn't understand it. And they still call it a charge. So I have an alternator being turned by a gas engine. Now, people are going to say, well, that's cheaper. You can get an alternator for nothing. You can get a gas engine for nothing. So you put that together and you're making electricity. It's a lot cheaper than your generator. The thing is, in order to do this, you have to be able to turn that alternator fast enough, 2,300 RPMs or something, and it will start producing 40 amps, which is more than what the generator produces at low speeds. Remember I said it was like 10 amps, let's just call it 10 amps at 25%. So the alternator is producing a lot more amps, which means you need more horsepower, which means you need more gas. You would have to run that gasoline engine, I don't know what size you would need, it would be trial and error. Let's say it was 5 horsepower. You'd have that 5 horsepower running at full speed, getting a gallon of gas every 4 hours, 3 hours. Remember, this one was 11 hours. So you're using more gas to produce more amps when all you need is 10 amps. So in my mind, It is more cost effective to save your money to go out and buy a generator that's already engineered for this lifestyle. Instead of trying to redesign the wheel, let's just use the wheel we got. So I have to apologize. This channel is not about all kinds of fancy builds. It is about living off grid, trying to disconnect from society as much as possible, which isn't totally possible, and reducing our costs and living happy. So if you'll click this up next box, take you to a video where I was talking about a hailstorm coming that we didn't get. So I hope I can inspire you to think realistically so you can live your dreams. Thanks for watching.